Last one of the day. How are y'all feeling? Everybody's like, oh yeah, just want some more NLP talks before the Ministry of Silly Talks, which is my favorite event at Pi Gotham. How about we get a big round of applause, loud and sustained, for the folks at Big Apple Pie. Man, the fact that every single year this group of volunteers puts together an event with the complexity of 2 weddings, except for the fact that the wedding party is 100 people and everyone RSVPs 2 weeks before, is a miracle. I know how hard it is to do this stuff, and they continue to do it at a level of excellence. So deeply grateful for the opportunity to be here with y'all, especially on the year when the branding is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles themed, which warms my heart in particular. So my name is Rob Spectre. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO and founder of ChildSafe AI. We're the artificial intelligence platform protecting kids online. And the way that I describe what we do is we use the worst of the internet to protect the best of the internet. So out there on the internet, there's a whole bunch of websites. Some of them are good, or some of them are bad. There are millions of kids, and there are hundreds of thousands of people every day that are looking to exploit them. So what we do is go to the places where those predators live, interact with them, and observe their behavior at scale. And we graph and we model that behavior that we see, and we use that to inform models and classifiers that can be used by law enforcement and by commercial companies to identify when those lines of behavior cross the boundary with folks under the age of consent. Does that make sense? Cool. So today's talk is using NLP to reduce the amount of wealth flowing into a local human trafficking economy. What we're going to be describing is basically our very first product, and it's a product that was developed here where we're located, the greatest city in the world, New York. First, we'll give a very super brief overview of human trafficking as a problem. We'll talk a little bit about why NLP can be a meaningful agent of change in order to combat it. We'll talk about that first product and its development, and then finish up with some results. Does that sound good? If we do this in 25 minutes, that would be amazing. So first, a disclaimer. All of our customers currently are law enforcement. I'm here representing ChildSafe AI. I'm not representing NYPD or any of our other law enforcement customers. That one's for the lawyers. This one is for all of you. We're obviously going to be talking about some heavy stuff. There's not going to be any graphic imagery in what follows, but there's definitely going to be some graphic themes and some graphic language. So if at any time you feel uncomfortable, feel free to go ahead and walk out. Forewarned is forearmed. Does that sound good to y'all? Cool. So first, let's talk about the problem. Human trafficking. The best number, and it's not a great one, that we have on the number of victims globally comes from the International Labor Organization, and they estimated at 40.3 million victims worldwide. That number 3 years ago was 25 million. This is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world today. The reason why it's growing so fast is 3 factors. The first one is the amount of money it generates, $150 billion a year in profit. The area that we focus on at ChildSafe is sex trafficking. That represents 99 of that 150 billion. To give you a frame of reference of how much money we're talking about, you would have to take the combined annual profit, not revenue, profit, from Apple, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Cisco, General Electric, Disney, Boeing, and Coca-Cola, and Toyota, and you're still not there. In order to get to 150 billion, you would have to add the annual combined payroll of the New York Yankees from the turn of the century to today. What effect does this have on the ground? Plenty. This is Sean Brown. This is a trafficker that was convicted here in New York in 2013. Probably the worst pimp on the planet. Did absolutely everything wrong. Didn't have a ton of victims. Didn't have a lot of know-how. Was terrible at marketing. Terrible at customer service. Almost everything about his operation was horrible, including how he disguised himself from law enforcement, which is why he got caught. And at the moment of his arrest, he still had $250,000 in cash sitting around his apartment, and 3 cars that were luxury automobiles, the cheapest of which was worth $60,000 in front of his place. Huge amount of money. You don't have to be very good in order to get a lot of it. Why did he go after the money? Because of this quotation right here. fantastic study from the Urban Institute, qualitative study of 74 convicted human traffickers, where they asked them a number of reasons, including the motivation for getting into this business in the first place. The number one reason everyone cited is that no one gets locked up for pimping, meaning the risk that they perceived from this type of criminal enterprise was far less than the narcotics that they were already selling. And the reason why they feel this way is because it's true. This is a look at all the federal prosecutions for human trafficking from 2010 to 2016. This is a look at the convictions. I'm going to repeat that again. These are federal prosecutions. So the folks that are prosecuting these cases are AUSAs, assistant U.S. attorneys that have conviction rates in the high 90s. And still, almost a decade later, we can only get this crime up to a coin flip in terms of conviction rates. So you can make a ton of money. You can almost always get away with it. But the real factor, the biggest factor, and the one that we try to help with is the wide distribution that's afforded through the cheap and easy scale of the internet. Why is this a significant factor in making folks choose to start selling kids instead of selling narcotics? Startup capital, right? If you're going to sell narcotics in New York, it's going to cost you somewhere between $10,000 to $32,000 for a pound of something in order to sell. If you're selling a kid, all you need is a victim. You need a burner phone, which is worth $15, and an ad on one of these websites, which is $3. So the barrier of entry is much lower, the risk is much lower, and you can make basically the same amount of money. These are the motivators behind the crime. So how can NLP help? That's a really good question. Well, here in the United States, a lot of this human trafficking is occurring online. And that's specifically occurring in online ecosystems where the product is marketed on the web and it's transacted over SMS. Much of this commerce of connecting the supply and the demand in the human trafficking economy occurs over text. Most of these advertisements are full of unstructured text, and the dates end up getting set up over SMS. This represents a pretty significant opportunity, so that's why we started embarking on our first product. And fortunately, we didn't have to go very far, and we found a good partner here with the New York Police Department. So we set up a communications platform to enable their undercovers to get a little bit more scale and increase their enforcement reach. So we sat down with one of their undercover assets, we handed them a ChildSafe enabled phone, and for 4 months we just started posting ads every day, conducting conversations with buyers, and a few days later, from a phone number that they didn't recognize, they would end up getting a deterrence message. So as we conducted these conversations and we looked at all the traffic that was going through, we noticed that this type of commerce, right, the kind of commerce that drives human trafficking is a closed NLP domain. This is something that natural language processing can effectively address. First, it's transactional. So the folks that are buying these kids online aren't critiquing poetry in these conversations that they're having in response to these advertisements, right? They're highly transactional. They're very short. They're between 7 and 10 messages, and they include a lot of the same themes. It's also call and response. The buyer sends in a text message and they're expecting an answer. This is the same kind of modality that you see with a lot of the virtual assistants that are out there. There's not much room for interpretation or long-form, multifaceted answers. It's always a call and a response. There's also very little variation nationwide in the language that's being used in this problem domain, which makes it easier to address from a natural language processing standpoint. So most of these online communities started in 1997. So we're talking about a more, for lack of a better term, mature online ecosystem than most of the ecosystems that you use today, right? These communities are older than 8chan, they're older than 4chan, they're older than Reddit, they're older than Facebook, they're older than Twitter, they're older than YouTube, they're older than Yelp, right? They've been around a really long time, and they developed their own vocabulary, and that vocabulary is universalized across everybody that uses it, which is great for NLP because slang creates really good tokens, right? The conversations that are occurring between these buyers and these providers have a significant amount of signal that you can vectorize and be able to test similarity against. And finally, the one that's probably the easiest to exploit in this field is the user tolerance. These buyers are highly motivated to transact, and you would be amazed at how many mistakes they will tolerate from a conversational intelligence that they're corresponding with. So what we did was we took a whole bunch of that data and we created an interface where we could have either a human asset correspond with these buyers in these online marketplaces, or we could have a conversational intelligence. This is a look at what buyers receive today when they text in. So where did we put these ads? We put these ads in places where we knew human trafficking was occurring, right? So this is, these ecosystems are really sophisticated. They've been around for a really long time. We're focusing primarily in places where they're selling kids. So these are websites that are not checking for IDs. These are websites that are super low cost. These are websites that don't have a child trafficking reporting function or is missing one. And most importantly, it's one that we've seen produce a number of cases in the jurisdiction in which we're working, right? So we're not publishing this stuff on Tinder. We're not putting this on consumer social media. We're targeting specifically the toxic online communities where this kind of activity is occurring. So let's talk a little bit about developing this tool. So the first thing you got to do when you embark on a project like this is pick a framework. Obviously, there are a lot of great ones right now, and just in the year and a half that we've been operating this platform, the amount of scholarship that's been produced and the amount of development that's been done on all three of these has been really amazing. We elected to go with Spacey, mostly for speed to market. It has a really strong tool chain. It's really easy to get a text classifier up and running with a small amount of code. And they also have a lot of ancillary tools that Ennis and Hannibal have developed over time that make it really easy to do this stuff at scale. So we had about 4 months of conversations between the trained NYPD undercover and the actors in this economy. The first thing that you got to do is the fun part, which is labeling it. And here, definitely had to send out a plug again to the folks at Explosion AI. We used Prodigy, which is an amazing annotation tool that allows you to keep your model in the loop while you're annotating the data that you're looking at. Also has a killer mobile interface, so made it really easy to annotate some data while you're sitting on the bike at the gym or on the subway. The first version was pretty simple. This is some pseudocode here of what it looked like. We just went for a retrieval-based answer system coming off of their RNN. So this is very similar to what you would see from Alexa or Siri or Google Home. Grab Spacey, you load up the model that you trained, you put in some amount of text. Most of our text came from SMS. You define which of the intents that it flagged for, the classes that you trained your model for, and then you use that to construct a response. Over time, obviously, every step of this has been developed more dramatically, but in a broad sense, this was the first version. So when measuring this, obviously you can look at area under the curve, or you can look at like your loss in your training, and I think all those are common, but I was a little concerned about using just internal training metrics for something that had such dire real-world consequence. And fortunately, we had a partner that was continuing to use the platform with human assets alongside our chatbots, which enabled us to really easily measure the performance of our chat models up here on the top in the green, and the humans, which are represented here on the bottom left. This is a box plot representing the conversation length by user. So one of the main objectives that we had with this platform is to extend the conversation with the buyer as long as possible, right? If we can keep the buyer on the line, texting with a piece of software that absolutely is not going to show up at his apartment, that means that we're wasting that much more time for that buyer to actually engage and find a child victim. So this performance, pretty lacking. You can see the median here is well below the human. The longer conversations obviously weren't happening, so we had some work to do. So we went back and started labeling some more. Eventually, we got to the point where the models that we're deploying today have 23 different intents. So in addition to saying hi, in addition to saying how are you, which basically never happens, we can respond to users that are asking for price using street lingo. We can haggle, we can flirt, we can talk about general location, specific location, identify spam, and a few others. And that started to help the performance quite a bit. We were able to get the median over the human during that interval, but the overall performance was still pretty much the same. So we thought, hey, let's go grab some vectors from some pre-trained models, right? This is the thing that's really big, especially in the spacey community. And the spacey community makes it super easy to get those word embeddings and incorporate them with your models. But we found that the performance was pretty lacking. This is the main model that we were using at the time. Directly below it is the same model with their web small vectors embedded in it. And you can see that the performance at the top end was fairly similar. But for the median, the majority of the conversations, it was slightly less performant. Can anybody guess why that might be? Like, we're taking trained vectors from a model that's really, really big, like millions and millions of pieces of text, and we're layering on top of our hundreds of thousands of pieces of text. What do you think made the big difference? Say what? Slang. Slang made the difference. Punctuation wasn't necessarily it, but definitely capitalization was. Like, a lot of the conversations that were occurring didn't incorporate those bits. So adding pre-trained vectors from pre-trained models that were placed on formal language didn't really improve the performance by any stretch. So we decided, hey, let's change the architecture of our model. Let's move from an RNN to a CNN. This is how we did that. Pip install upgrade Spacey. Like everybody else that used Spacey 2.0, deployed CNN, so that ended up being pretty easy. And we saw a degradation of performance, which was really, really rough. Once the CNN came into place, we definitely identified some problems with our training data that we started to shore up. Some of those were removing stop words, which helped dramatically. We also rebalanced the positive and negative labels for our classes. One of the things about Prodigy that I think is really strong, that annotation tool I mentioned earlier from Explosion, is that it's highly opinionated with how you train these labels. And its opinion is that a trainer, a person that is labeling this data, should work on one class at a time. So you do all the classes for how are you, then you start doing the classes for price, then you start doing the classes for location. And as it turns out, it makes you get through those labels a lot faster, but it does produce a lot of negative labels in your data set. Once we removed those and the stop words, we were able to finally get performance that was much higher than a human. That's pretty rad, right? Right, better than a human being? No, it wasn't rad, because it was totally over-engineered. So once we started looking through the data and found what folks were talking about, we definitely saw that our performance metric in this case was somewhat misplaced. As it turns out, these buyers are really only looking for 4 things. 97% of the conversations that we observed over the course of a year of operating this platform fall into 4 categories. Folks are either asking for availability, your price, if they can see an additional picture, and your location. So we made a bot that was really good at answering 23 things, but as it turns out, the market only wanted to answer 4. So stellar. So let's talk about a little bit about the results. We started deploying the chatbot in August 2018 after a few months of prototyping here in New York. We have deployed to 10 different law enforcement agencies. We also powered the largest counter-demand operation in the country. Twice a year, we've done it 3 times so far. We have over 30,000 buyers in the system, and 88% of those buyers we never see again. Only 12% reoffend. As near as we can tell, we have the best model of, or we have the best sense of the estimation of prevalence for demand for this type of activity in the country today. So what kind of effect does it have meaningfully for law enforcement? It can have a really big one. I'm going to remove a few of these options here just to highlight one. These are 3 websites that are particularly egregious for human trafficking. Skip the Games, Mega Personals, and City X Guide. This is Skip the Games. City X Guide, the number 2. Mega Personals. Okay? So you take a look at this graph, which was generated from Alexa website information, and you as a law enforcement commanding officer must be like, well, there's only one website I really need to go to, right? Let's skip the games, the one up here on the top, right? Seems to be getting the most traffic. Well, as it turns out, that traffic is garbage, right? That's not where the demand is actually located. This is a graph that's really difficult to look at, and this was taken from a month during last summer. Blue line here represents the number of posts, the number of ads that were located on the site. This bar right here indicates the number of buyers that we attracted from that site. So even though Skip the Games had the highest amount of traffic according to Alexa website information, the highest amount of ads that were posted on it by a mile, it wasn't attracting any buyers at all. It was a ghost town, especially here in New York. Mega Personals and City X Guide, which had a similar amount of ads that were posted on it, however, had dramatically different terms, dramatically different amounts of buyers that were located there. What did this tell us? It told us that the only way to really know which website is popular in your town is to be able to quantify how many buyers actually text in, right? Just because something is trending nationally in website traffic graphs doesn't mean it's the website that works for you. And we found this is true across the country. This is taken from Chicago. So these are ad performance for different websites that are known to generate human trafficking cases online. Here you can see Mega Personals, which was much lower than City X Guide here in New York. Mega Personals was the dominant one in Chicago. City X Guide was a ghost town. So what this illustrated to law enforcement really for the first time is that this economy is geographically fragmented. Just because there are 12 different websites that are operating in the country doesn't mean that they're equally popular across the country. Really, if you're law enforcement, you don't need to worry about 20 or 30 or 500 or 1,000 different websites. You really only need to focus on 2 or 3 advertising sites that are important in your area and 1 hobby board. And that's one of the bits our software is able to do. We were also able to get better intelligence, right? So one of the things that we're able to do once you're receiving these conversations and you're able to control how they respond, you can add something to the pipeline that will periodically ask where you found out about the ad. And you can follow that up asking that person if that particular website is their favorite, right? And the answers are really surprising, right? What this enabled us to do is correspond with these buyers for the first time and ask them what they were looking for, like, and where they were looking. This resulted in a higher level of fidelity to expand the net in these local economies and find out where these buyers were going. And once we had that named entity recognition in place and it started getting really strong, we could extend it to other areas and other parts of our collection networks that were more passive, like web scraping on these hobby boards. Here you can see this is a buyer here in New York that's indicating that the new norm for hourly price is $400 and up. This represents a significant increase from when we first started observing this activity in New York. It also gave us some information on demographics, like we can ask the person if they live in town or if they're out of town, and that can give us a better sense of what this looks like in your individual area. Again, this is very different from community to community. Places like Chicago, New York, mostly townies are the folks that are buying. Places like Seattle, Tarrant County, which is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, most of the people that they were attracting were from out of town. All right. We also got some really interesting information on the psychographics. We could find out how many people repeated over a particular campaign. This is from our latest national campaign this summer, where 5% of the folks that we observed reoffended. We can also get more psychographics, how many people are responding to multiple ads as opposed to 1 ad, right? If you're a law enforcement undercover and you're posting a single ad and you're getting 30 responses, there's no way you're going to be able to respond to all 30 of them. However, you can prioritize which ones are the ones that are responding to more advertisements. Those are the ones that are more likely to transact that day and where you should be investing your investigative time. We can also see how many folks respond to deterrence, how many people don't respond to deterrence. This is helpful for measuring the efficacy of this outreach. And most importantly, we can find more about what these folks are trying to buy. So in this operation, we identified 3,079 buyers. How many of them do you think ever asked for the provider's age? Just said something as basic as, how old are you? 3,079. How many asked, how old are you? None. That was going to be my guess, but it was 5. All right. What we're learning about these folks by interacting with them is that they're far more dangerous than we ever realized, right? Like, This is a very complex issue. It involves like some very serious politics, but one thing that we've been able to identify by interacting with these buyers is what they care about, and they certainly don't care about whether or not the person that they're buying from is above the age of consent. We're finishing up with one more minute at a time. The last thing I'd like to finish up with is just sharing some examples of when our bot missed. So whenever we had a message that did not match our classifier, we put it into a specific queue so that we can ultimately review it. And this produced some really revealing and important cases, like recruiting. This is a pimp that's trying to recruit one of our ads here in New York. This is one in Chicago. This is one in Dallas-Fort Worth. All three of these are outstanding investigations. You also get ancillary stuff when you send these folks deterrence messages. This is a guy in New York who responded to receiving a deterrence message. He says, "Fuck you, gonna kill a cop you see, all the dead hookers I kill, you'll never find them." He had a lot of priors for this kind of activity before. So all this to conclude, to wrap up, thank you very much for spending a little time with us today. Human trafficking, obviously, a massive amount of profit, but NLP can have significant impact. And broader than that, I would like to make an appeal to each of you as a technologist in this sphere. A little amount of code can make a huge, huge impact in this problem domain. When you're selecting your framework, be sure to not just select it based on its features, but the tool chain that exists around it. You're going to spend more time labeling your data than you're going to spend modeling your data, so find a tool that works for you. Training cleanups seem to have the biggest benefit in terms of overall performance, and look closely at the things that you're measuring before you start engaging in model optimization. It'll make a big difference. Again, my name is Rob. I work at ChildSafe AI. We're looking for folks that are experts in NLP, computer vision, and API design. We have a whole bunch of t-shirts that we just got. These are the very first edition ChildSafe AI t-shirts out in the back, and I would love to talk to you a little bit more about what we're working on. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. We take some questions, or are we done? Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, bud.
How do you get ahead of evolving slang?
You know, that's one area. The question for the benefit of the video was how do you keep ahead of evolving slang? And this is one that I was expecting to be a bigger problem than it actually was. And there have been a few quantitative studies on how language in all online communities evolves over time. And it turns out it's pretty slowly. Like there's only meaningful change every 6, 7 years. However, there are meaningful changes to how you refer to underage victims based upon filtration mechanisms on a lot of these websites, right? So folks will use Amber Alert for a while until Backpage blocked it. Then they switched to Bunny, and then Backpage blocked that, and then they switched to Fresh. The changes in the language appear to be on targeting underage victims, and the changes appear to be a result of filtration in these online communities as opposed to any real evolution in their language. Super heavy answer, but.
How do you judge the accuracy of repeat offenders when you said it sounds like many are using burner phones?
So the question is, how do you measure the accuracy of repeat offenders since many of them are using burner phones? This was another thing that was super surprising to me. 74% of the people that text in do so on a postpaid cell phone. So they're not using burner phones. They're not using like Cricket Wireless or Metro PCS. In fact, a lot of times if you look up the phone number in like a consumer like marketing database, you'll find the wife's name on there a lot, which is remarkable. But to answer the question on efficacy, absolutely there are some people that receive a deterrence message and then they come back. We do some text similarity to see if we can fish a few of those out. Doesn't seem to be happening super often. 88%, I think, would probably be the ceiling rather than the floor of what that number is. Go ahead.
Is the price increase of $400 an indicator for the success of this program? Is it the supply is going down? Or is that?
I would love to take credit for that, but I think there are a lot of macroeconomic factors going on here, including new legislation, massive disruption in the online channels where these folks congregate. Well, so the question is like, is the increase in price representative of the supply going down, and is this platform responsible for it? And I'm not sure that we can credibly say that. I think we have three working theories. One is the most optimistic one, which is it's a market rebalance due to the supply going down, right? Econ 101, supply goes down, price goes up, and maybe that's what's going on. Second factor may be price collusion in the same way that the buyers are highly connected communities that are exchanging information, the providers are as well. So it's possible that these traffickers are talking to each other and collectively raising their prices as their advertising prices increase. The third one that we considered is it may be a demand spiral, meaning this is scaring off a large number of buyers. They're not getting as many responses per advertisement as they were before, which is definitely the case. Like when we first started doing this stuff, we were getting 60, 80 responses per advertisement. Now we're getting between 10 and 20. So it's possible that the demand is drying up, so that's causing folks on the supply side to increase their prices, which will cause more demand to leave, and it'll ultimately enter a demand spiral. But I don't think we can say any of that with certainty.
How do you differentiate between regular prostitution and child prostitution? Right? And how do you, in this typical use case, you would probably want to increase the numbers. Like since one offense is more severe than the other, you would want to increase the share of the number of offenders that you catch for soliciting children over adults. So how do you go about that?
So the question was, how do you differentiate commercial sex involving minors and commercial sex involving adults? Fortunately, we don't have to do that at all. The buyers do it for us, right? So what we do is we post in places that we know are generating human trafficking cases, and we post with photos and language that would be suggestive of a trafficking victim, right? So we make everything look like it's going to be a trafficking victim, and then the folks ultimately text in. But you're right, the mismatch in the penalties is really severe. And this is one of the big gender equality issues in the country, in my view. Like the penalty for selling in New York is a felony. The penalty for buying in New York is a misdemeanor. That's not right.
Is everything you gather through your chatbot admissible in court? Are you gathering legitimate evidence in these cases?
Is it admissible in court? We haven't tried a case based on data that has come out of this so far. When we find a target that's interesting, we usually tailor an operation after that particular target and then pick them up with the ability for an undercover to be able to testify. I think I got to work over here. Sorry, guys.
Do you see the criminal network adapt and evolve as they observe your reporting it would use to investigate all this? Do they learn and evolve and be smarter?
I think that's one thing. I think that was another thing that I was definitely expecting when working with this population. Like, once we started engaging in this activity, I expected everybody to switch to voice over IP apps, right? Like, if I text your prepaid cell phone with a warning message from NYPD, I would expect you would hop on Google Voice or WhatsApp or some or Pinger or something like that. But we carefully monitor those kinds of deltas, and they don't seem to be budging. So I don't know if that's because we're continually reaching new buyers and the buyers that we've reached before have exited the market, or if they're just continuing to persist. I mean, there are some buyers that try to buy from us 3 times a week. We have buyers that have received hundreds of deterrence messages. Go ahead, man.
I may have missed it, but did you identify individual buyers more the network side and the pin networks, whatever that these guys are?
So there's a lot of software that really focuses on the distribution networks that take place by scraping all these advertising sites and using similarity in phone numbers and photos and those bits and kind of mashes them all together. Thorn is a nonprofit. They have one called Spotlight. Marinus Analytics is a for-profit company spun out of Carnegie Mellon. They have one called Traffic Jam. Uncharted Software is a defense contractor in Toronto. They have one called Telfinder. All of these tools have existed for 6 or 7 years. Didn't feel like we really had anything to add to that product category. So instead, we tried to focus on something operational and focused on the demand. We'll take. So the deep web, so the question was, does this take a look at what's going on the deep and dark web? You know, that's another surprising point in this particular economy. For CSAM material, so that's material that includes like child sexual abuse, that economy is primarily on the dark web, and that's how that, you know, that barter system is largely exchanged over Tor. This economy, however, doesn't have that, and we haven't really found a dark web marketplace that has taken off in this economy. And you know, I'd probably say it has to do with the retail component of this piece. Like the buyers just can't figure out Tor. They also don't use cryptocurrency almost ever.
From the NYPD side, what are the KPIs that you look at? What's their success criteria that informs them that this is actually working?
So for a lot of our law enforcement partners, what they're trying to do is reduce the overall number of arrests for buyers, right? Like their sense is like if we start having these stings and we're arresting 15 people, 20 people, they want to see that number go down, right, over time. And we went from, you know, arresting around 15 people a pop to arresting 10. So we're definitely making a difference there. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming out. I'm still going to be here. We got some t-shirts in the back. We'll see you.